Well, children, for this term. Oh, and by the way, while you're away, remember the places you visit, because when you come back, we can have the class discussion about them. All right, off you go. Goodbye, Johnny. Bye, Mary. Have a good time. And that's how Johnny came to tell us about Australia's most unusual mammal, the platypus. One day during the holidays, he visited Mr. and Mrs. David Fleay of Healesville, about 40 miles out of Melbourne. Johnny was sad next morning as the men were leaving for the day, but his expression soon changed when David Fleay asked him if he'd like to come too. They were off to capture a platypus pair to be flown to Western Australia. The platypus is protected by law, so Mr. Fleay took along a special permit from the Victorian Department of Fisheries and Game. It was hard work cutting a path through the ferns and swordgrass, but their labors were rewarded when they found a lovely clear stream, which Mr. Fleay knew contained platypuses. Look, a platypus, and Johnny was the first to see it. The moment it saw him, of course, it splash dived, stirring up mud and leaving a trail of bubbles. It left the pool and began to swim upstream, pulling its streamlined body, 20 inches long, by its forepaws only. Its sensitive bill probed the way ahead, for underwater the platypus closes its eyes and ears. Every few feet, it came to the surface for air, for it breathes just like you and I. It was obviously a female in daytime finding food for its youngsters. The platypus led them upstream to some burrows in deeper water, where the going was harder. Keen Eye soon found a burrow entrance. He explained that the platypus always starts its entrance above water level, and only in flood periods is it submerged. The burrow rose steeply towards the top of the bank, so it looked like a nesting burrow, as these are built high, well clear of floods. Sure enough, after digging upwards for 15 feet, they came to an old platypus nest of gum leaves, strips of bark, and reed ribbons. Mr. Fleay told Johnny how a platypus builds its nest. In early spring, when the mother is about to lay some eggs, she digs a new burrow and uses her tail to barricade the earth behind her. This keeps out intruders and gives a constant moist atmosphere. For 10 days, she collects damp leaves for the nesting chamber, seals the burrow, then lays her eggs. These are about ½ an inch across, tough and leathery like Australian river tortoise eggs. Mother then curls up and holds them against her body. About 10 days later, the tiny pink babies push their way through the shells, aided by an egg tooth, which is later lost. Mother platypus is the only mammal which supplies milk through large pores onto her fur. The babies then suck the fur. She feeds them this way for 4 months. The search continued, and they found many burrows because the platypus usually camps alone in different burrows when looking for food. All burrows are dug the shape of the animal's body, oval on top, flat at the bottom, and about as wide as a man's hand. Grubs are a choice item of food. The platypus eats certain kinds of earthworms, the larvae of beetles and other insects, and usually crustaceans such as shrimps and these freshwater yabbies. Mr. Flay's expert eye picked out platypus footprints from those of water rats and yabbies. Johnny, on top of the bank, told him whether they led into rabbit burrows, for if they did, it was hopeless digging them out. In Victoria, rabbit burrows provide sanctuary for platypuses, particularly in time of flood. At last, Mr. Fleay found some fresh tracks and the entrance to a burrow. He probed the hole with a stick, and it rose suddenly, just as a platypus burrow should. And so, digging commenced. Johnny hoped there'd be someone home this time. Cutting into the bank revealed the smooth earth of a slide made by a platypus's body, and they could now smell a musty, foxy odor typical of the male. With each stage of digging, Mr. Fleay carefully felt inside until suddenly something moved and they heard a soft growl. Listen. Few people in the world have heard a platypus growling in protest. Mr. Fleay caught him before he could get away, and they all admired his fine coat of soft fur and handled him carefully to avoid being jealous on its hind legs. The male platypus is the only venomous furred animal in the world. The hand webs were well developed for swimming, while the bill and protective shield just below the eyes were like tough leather, yet extremely sensitive. Johnny was amazed at the way the web folded behind its nails to allow for digging and walking on land. This was just what Fleay wanted to send to Western Australia, one of the first 2 platypuses ever to fly to Perth in an attempt to establish them there. It had been a tiring but successful day, so Johnny was really glad when they headed for home. Next day, Mr. Fleay told the story of Corrie, the only platypus ever bred in captivity. Corrie's father was named Jack, and Jill was the name of her mother. The eggs Jill laid were no bigger than a thumbnail. Jill dug a round nesting chamber in a bank of hard-packed earth, built a nest and laid 2 eggs, each half in diameter. 8.5 weeks later, the baby, Corrie, had only a tiny milk bill and was blind and helpless. This photograph of Corrie was radioed round the world in 1944. Her fur was then like satin. Here, Mrs. Fleay holds one of Jill's nests to show its size. Mr. Fleay, the only scientist to breed the platypus in captivity, paid full tribute to Harry Burrell, whose great book, The Platypus, was the result of 20 years' difficult field observation. It was dedicated to his wife for her help and encouragement. Johnny's next adventure was a visit to Healesville Sanctuary to see Corrie and Jack still alive in captivity. The platypusery, specially designed by Mr. Fleay, had a freshwater tank in which worms and yabbies were placed. The platypus will not eat on dry land. At the back was the earthen bank which Jill built her burrow and nest in late 1943. Leading to the bank were wooden tunnels filled with grass hay. Captive platypuses usually live in these drying tunnels, for they dislike wet fur. David Fleay moved over to one of the tunnels, opened it up, and hey presto! There was Jack, father of Corrie. Jack, one of the largest platypuses known, has been in captivity for the record time of 12 years. The platypus, like its fellow egg-layer, the spiny anteater, has a slow birth rate, but apparently lives a long while. Jack will give scientists their first definite indication about the age of a platypus. Jack loved the water. He closed his eyes and ears and weaved about as he would amongst the snags and mud of a natural stream. Platypuses normally leave their burrows in the evening, swim and feed most of the night, and then hide during the day. But when Jack found there was no food in the pool, he headed back to his dry, comfortable bachelor quarters. He was so persistent, in fact, that David Fleay had to open the front door and let him in. Next door, they saw the sanctuary's most treasured possession, Corrie, daughter of Jack. The keeper treated her affectionately, for she was a lovable little thing. Being bred in captivity, Corrie was not as shy as platypuses, and so took her time to enter the water. Johnny was thrilled when given a worm to feed Corrie, who was as quick as a flash with her sensitive bill. In their natural state, of course, platypuses nuzzle out worms and yabbies from the mud, then come to the surface to chew them and breathe air. In place of teeth, they have hard plates set in the jaws for chewing and grinding their food. Mr. Fleay also showed Johnny the enemies of the platypus, the common introduced fox, which often kills the young when they first leave the nest and wander over dry land, and carpet snakes, which occasionally kill platypuses. Another enemy is the native water rat or beaver rat, which may sometimes destroy young platypuses before they adapt themselves to the wild. But worst of all are the illegal drum nets set by fishermen. these have accounted for thousands of dead platypuses. They trap the animals underwater and drown them. Now, you've all heard what Johnny has told you about the platypus, and I want you to remember these additional points. The platypus is the world's most primitive mammal. It belongs to the same animal class as man. The platypus and the Australian spiny anteater are the only two egg-laying mammals in the world. Now, the scientific name for platypus is Ornithorhynchus anatinus. That's Greek for a creature with a bill like a duck. As a matter of fact, early settlers used to call it a duck bill. The word platypus means flat-footed. Now, I want you to remember, when you're talking about more than one platypus, say platypuses. Now, I think we just have time to see where the platypus lives. Around here, around Mount Kosciuszko, in the icy streams, in Queensland, in the warmer waters, and in fact, right down through the east coast of New South Wales, into the colder parts of Victoria, and in Tasmania. Now, right here near Melbourne, you'll find Healesville, where Johnny stayed with Mr. Fleay. Now, I want you all to find out more about the platypus for yourselves. These books by Burrell, Troughton, and Fleay will give you all the information you want. And write me a composition about how the platypus can be protected. Remember, bushfires and floods are a great danger. They cause erosion and landslides on the banks of streams where the platypus lives. And we have sanctuaries to protect our wonderful animals. Yes, let's all give thought.